Hi, how are you all? I recognize some faces in here, so I'm so excited. I warned my panel, and I'll warn you, when I get excited about things, especially if I host panels or do talks, I dance around a little bit. So they very graciously moved a little bit so that, and I'm also a little short here, so you could, but I'm excited, so excited about today talking about holograms. And so I was thrilled to be asked to do this. This is something that I'm still learning about, although I've focused on AR and VR and wrote a book about the metaverse and over 20 industries. And it's like I want to get to the what makes holograms so cool. What are the use cases for them? When should you think about using them? And in as much as we know so far today. So we have a lot of different perspectives today, and I wanted my panelists to introduce themselves a little bit, and then we'll get into it. I have questions on my phone, but they already by now know that I might go off script. So we shall see. Okay, go, John.
So you're on script now, so I go
I'm
first?
sort of on script.
Yeah, okay, all right, good. We were joking about getting some booze up here so we can really make this fun. Just kidding. That would be the off-script part. So I'm John Karafin, CEO of Lightfield Lab, and we are building a technology called solid light, which is giving you the capability of modulating literally tens of billions of pixels, or photons, and you can actually form an object in midair. My background is in visual effects, entertainment. I was an executive at Digital Domain, Lytro, RealD, a bunch of other technology companies that are in entertainment, might be familiar with, and literally couldn't be more excited to be on this panel and see so many familiar faces, so thank you for coming.
Hello.
Molly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Lavik. I am the CEO and founder of Mentor Insight, Inc., and I'm really excited. I'm going to be sharing with you today about my moonshot hologram bold mission, as well as talking about how I have spent since actually 1995 helping entrepreneurs and inventors in the primarily holographic technology space find the resources, the venture capital, angel investor, donors, sponsors, really just find the funding they need to make their bold visions a reality. And I'm really excited to see familiar faces here today and to be here with such great people on the panel. Thank you.
Natascha.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Natascha French. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of MVP Interactive. So what we do is we create immersive fan experiences. So imagine being able to take a holographic image with your favorite player, but probably the reason I'm really on this panel is right before MVP Interactive, I was the CMO of Ventana, and we were creating interactive holograms, transporting people to different places. So being able to throw a holographic ball to Roger Federer and have him hit it back to you. And, I'm using that term holographic, and we'll learn a lot more about it. It's not too sexy to sell a holographic projection or Pepper's Ghost. So that term hologram we'll talk about further. But prior to that, I think where my whole career comes together was I started off as a journalist at CNN. So I'm a storyteller by heart. And the exciting thing about all these mediums, including hologram, is to be able to tell brand story, organization stories, and individual stories through these different mediums. And I love holograms. I think it's one of the coolest mediums to tell those stories through. So a lot of that is kind of where my passion lies in and how I've been in this space and why I'm still here.
Yay, thank you all for coming today. And I know you all hit on it a little bit, but what made you so excited about holograms specifically that you're like, I'm going to do some of this in my careers? Because it's not necessarily AR, it's not VR, it's not always AI, which is like all three we've been talking about a ton across the conference. But what got you into it? And we can go we'll hit everybody. Why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, if you have anyone in my family, I probably have the best handful of jobs for great cocktail conversations. So prior to holograms, I worked in the kidnap risk management world. So I literally had a pyrotechnic license. So you can talk about me that later. But after that world, I was at a TEDx in Venice, 2015. And on the stage was the CEO of Ventana standing next to a holographic avatar. And she was interacting and talking to it. And I was like, I need to be a part of that. So literally the next day, I ran into her at another event in LA and was like, I don't even know what I saw, but that was awesome. And then I was like, put together a marketing plan, send it to her. I'm like, I think I can help you grow. And literally the next week, I started as a consultant that became their CMO. But that was, I'll never forget that vision, was the avatar and just saying, this is the future, this is really cool. And I think we could do a lot with marketing with that. And it kind of led me on my way.
And Molly?
I wanted to live in a world where we had all the help we need, all the knowledge right at our fingertips, and I just thought it's got to be easier in life. And I thought that holograms were the path forward, and like a lot of people who have a passion and purpose they discover in life, I was zigzagging my way there, and I started by creating this conference called AI Showbiz at the intersection of entertainment, AI, blockchain and holograms, and I see Brett and Mark and some of my speakers who so inspired me on this path that I'm on now.
Well, I'm a geek at heart. Just putting that out there. We'll geek out later after this. So science fiction has promised us three things. You see people flying with jetpacks, you see flying cars, and digital holograms. I started to see jetpacks. I started to see flying cars, and God damn it, we're making holograms. So it's actually something I've been working on for well over 20 years, and between GarageBand style through where you see us today, the founding team and I have a true passion to actually be the ones to bring this into market.
So now when I told people I know that I was going to be hosting a hologram panel, I think that about 70% of them said, do you know about Lightfield Lab? Oh. Which was pretty awesome. And I was like, that's very cool. So what I would like from you, because the definition, like the true extreme definition of a hologram, because it's almost like for any of you out there of when people were talking about VR versus 360, and people were doing 360 video and saying, we're doing VR, and then all the 6DoF VR people were like, no, you're not. Like, we're a little bit in that. So what I want is the equivalent of the VR 360, like VR 6DoF experience definition equivalent for a hologram.
I will do this. Let me just get a quick poll of the audience so I can address it as accurately as I can. How many are in content creation? Show of hands. Okay, and display technology? Okay, less so. Production of any sort? Unemployed? No, just kidding. Okay, that gives me a good idea here. So I'll do a physics-based definition, and then I will give more of a what it does definition, just to help bring it into reality. So you have to be able to control and modulate phase and amplitude, the components of light, in order to bring something into focus. It gives you reflectance, and through reflectance, you see something that is as real as the real thing.
And so this is, again, I'm gonna interrupt you. I warned you all I was gonna interrupt. So no head-mounted display, no mobile phone.
And no other tracking in order to form the object. It is the actual thing. This is the extreme definition that can't always happen, and then we will expand. So, correct.
So first that you're not holding something or wearing something or being tracked.
And the actual object is forming in space.
Okay.
So by actual object, what does that mean? If you ask yourself, do you believe that I'm on a 2D screen right now? The answer should be, hopefully, no. And if you think that, there's some doctors out there somewhere. You come to these conferences because you want to be able to see and interact. Your brains respond very differently than when you see a real thing, a real person, than when you are looking at a flat illustration or a 2D display. So the practical definition is you are forming focus of an object in midair, and that is a hologram, which is very different than the experience of looking at something that is either what I like to refer to as augmented 2D, so things that are outside of 2D, or other 2D illustrations.
Right.
I went a little deeper than you asked. But
no, it's okay. No, it's good because we're going to have a variation of audience members who know the details of it. So this is, again, like the VR kind of, VR is like 6 off or more experience that the true VR people like. It's not VR if it's 360 video. So, but you can have different kinds of experiences that are maybe not that kind of, I'm going to say moonshot. No. So explain when because you've actually done the moonshot, and how is what you worked on, how is it fit within that sort of hologram ecosystem that's being built?
So I just want to say, if you have a moonshot mission, go for it. And that's what I did. I had this driving desire to create an Obi-Wan Kenobi style hologram that is AI enabled, that you can beam right into the palm of your hand, that can help you with anything, anywhere, anytime. And I thought, well, I'll just get the Wikipedia library. You know, that can be the brain, why not? And of course, they didn't just hand it over, and this is the advice part from me. If you have a strength in an area, then you can bridge your way into your goal. And mine was attracting resources. So I helped Wikimedia raise a lot of money. And then they said, oh, here, take the Wikipedia and use it however you want. And that's where I brought in a dear friend, Nova Spivak. And if you've heard Nova's name, he's written a lot of the AR patents out there. And he started the ARC Mission Foundation. So fast forward, I'm now working with Nova. He's got the Wikipedia, and we're creating ARCs, backing up all of the knowledge and culture of humanity. I'm wearing one right now, the Wikipedia one. And the goal was to launch it on the moon. Now, this ARC is made of nickel, and it has a lot of data on it. And that data is etched into the nickel at 300,000 DPI using some holographic component processes. And so we launched it in 2019. It crashed, so we didn't have a clean win. We tried again, didn't quite happen. And then after the pandemic, lo and behold, in February, we launched it. I was at Kennedy Space Center for the launch, and it is there on the moon. So when you look at the moon, there is a holographic arc up there, and you know that was my moonshot mission to start with my Obi-Wan Kenobi.
So how does when you say holographic, how does that? I mean, usually when I think of holographic, I think of light, right, and playing with light. How does your nickel moonshot fit within that sort of definition?
Well, Dr. Bruce Ha created this, a very famous chemist at Kodak, and so for the more technical details, he could elaborate after if you have questions. But very basically, he's using one beam of light instead of two, and it's all digital. And because of that, it creates holographic components. And I could get a lot more technical, but that's kind of the short version of it. And so one of the coolest parts, and maybe after if any of you look at it, it refracts light in such a beautiful way. And this is not pigmented color. It is actually the color from butterflies, the natural color. There's some biomimicry going on here, and that's just another component of holograms. So there's two examples.
So thank you. Natascha, you've worked in like all different variations of it. So how do you see holograms and holograms in sort of the real world, as the panel is called, and these other kind of technologies fit within, like, in comparison to each other, and then within that sort of VR, AR ecosystem?
Yeah, so in 2015, when we would go to very large brands or sport teams and we say we have this hologram, they thought it was the back of a baseball card, like the hologram you'd see there. So a lot of what I did and what I do in my role is education. And so the hologram is that when I talk about both the software and the hardware is, I'm sure you're familiar with Pepper's Ghost. If you're not, it's the deflection. So the hologram that, Dawn talking about is, I always say, is like that's something that we want to get to, but a brand doesn't have that much money to afford that, right, and do that. So
we don't talk about price points.
Not price points, but just like in real, like to get there, that content, that creation, if you're trying to. So in my world, as I mentioned in my introduction, if I went up to like an agency and said, I'd love to sell you my holographic protection or my Peppers, like they wouldn't get it, right? So it's like creating that term, we use hologram. And most people in the space and one of the competitors we've dealt with, like we kind of all came to saying like we're going to sell it as this, right? So, and it comes down to the content piece of it. So the examples I was giving is we can capture an individual, let's just say Roger Federer, the example I was giving with the athlete, we catch them in either volumetric capture we'll talk about later, so capturing them and then placing them in the environment. You need a display and lights. So the company that I worked with, we use LED walls as our base. We'd have a holographic projection. It would project there as if the person's there, and you could see it at a 180-degree angle, both in life size, both in smaller displays. We added the interactivity piece as a consumer component, right? So using sensors, and as the sensors got better, starting with the Connect back in the day in the early 2000s, and so placing that individual, cutting them out and placing their projection next to the person, and then they could actually virtually serve a tennis ball, and Rogers would hit it back, you'd get a video, and you can share that on social. So I think where we took that concept was making it applicable for organizations and brands to engage with consumers, but we were capturing data on that. So we made it more of that full consumer experience and using that term hologram to create that experience. But we also, what we do today, we're still capturing, we have a thing called Pose with the Pro where we capture, I was like, ooh. You can dance.
He's
there.
very supportive.
Very excited. We capture athletes and then using all different, whether it's volumetric capture or other methods, and then you could take a holographic selfie with them, whether it's through your phone, through an AR experience, whether through a display. So we're using the capture of that and then integrating that across augmented reality. We've done stuff with virtual reality, but with the actual displays, what you would know today, like you've gone to Disneyland, you've seen that. And then another thing we did was people wanted to be in different locations, so we would capture that individual and we could teleport them at another location with less than a second delay and have them interact with the audience as if they were next to you. And I'm talking about, we were doing this back in 2015, 16, 17, and so it's just where it's come today. I was just kind of giving you that background of where it started. Now we'll talk a little bit about where it's going and where it is now.
I think there's also, the parallel of AR, and then certain people would say like there's the quality of the display that you get more reach versus, sort of, I don't want to say lower quality, but you get like the really sort of highest quality.
Different features.
Yes.
Different things.
That it might be on one end of the spectrum, and the other one you're going to get a much bigger reach at the other.
And even with that back then, when we were using LED lights instead of projectors, like we're talking about like using a 1.2 millimeter versus that made a huge difference in the hologram, right? So it's like the better the LED walls got, the crisper the projection looked, right? And that was just every year something new came out, right? So we were.
But I love how you're talking about it in terms of that it's not sort of like, okay, do I want to, if you're sort of a creator out here and maybe you can, this is my like curveball, I guess. But if you're like a creator, you're like, do I create a VR experience, an AR experience, a holographic experience? I think that there's a little bit of it feels like you're integrating a little bit like, do we dial one up versus one down? Where do we put it, or even projection mapping, and how does it all kind of fit together? And I think that you're saying like you don't have to pick one or the other. You're disagreeing with me, which is fine.
It depends.
So where then are the times where you say this should absolutely be a hologram?
Are you addressing me?
Yeah.
Crap. Well, let me caveat to start.
Sorry.
That the question here is, what is the story you're trying to tell, right?
Yep.
Black and white is a fantastic medium if that is going to support your story. So just because you have a color display doesn't mean that you're going to want to use all of those capabilities. So it really is a question for what is it that you're trying to do? What is the story? What is the thing that you're trying to communicate? So now let me go back to the original question. I'm giving you the hard
one, sorry.
Yeah. So the question about where will you use it, why do you want to use it, it comes down to if you're trying to create something that is as real as having the real thing. You want to see somebody on stage that you cannot differentiate between the real and the holographic. That is where a true wavefront, the type of displays like a solid light display, that would be the thing that you would want. If you want to be able to have something that is a modified experience, so just more than regular 2D, there are a lot of fantastic technologies out there.
Right.
And the things that were being described are really beautiful, right? And even regular 2D display, like this projection on this screen, might be all you need in order to create that experience. So it really comes down to what amount of bandwidth, ultimately, that you want to put into it. We call it the photon budget. So what do you want to do with it?
Why, when people would, like years ago for VR, they'd be like, why does it need to be in VR? Why does it need?
Right.
So it's a little
You
bit
really
of
wanna
the
turn around
why,
and see around.
why
Right.
does it need to be a hologram?
Yeah, if
kind
it
of
doesn't
question.
need to be something that is an object, and images are okay, you probably shouldn't use a hologram, right? If you don't want color, you probably shouldn't shoot with a color camera. Well, you could, and then use a mezzanine format and blah, 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 all that stuff. So the real reason to use it is when you're trying to recreate reality. That's the reason to use it.
Right. And then this is where I start getting in the debate. Like, Molly, I can see you already like getting excited
Good.
to answer.
Yeah.
Because this is the debate we got into is sort of like, well, if you really need to recreate reality, that's what VR sells itself as. That's sometimes what AR sells itself as.
It does have the word reality in it, right?
Exactly.
But it is
Exactly.
virtually.
Although that like holo reality, there's probably a company named that
Probably.
out there.
Trademark
So
patent pending.
yes, exactly. Molly, what were you gonna?
I
what were
was
you
just going to say that holograms are really healing, and we learned this during the pandemic because we were on Zoom, shoulders up, and then when you introduce holographic volumetric type of experiences, your brain, they did studies, releases dopamine, it's the same thing that happens. We learned we have to have human interaction or hologram interaction. So I would make an argument that we need more holograms out there in every situation, if for no other reason our own well-being, but there's so many other use cases. I mean, holographic medicine is a way to beam people places and treat people. You just have to make sure you've got your privacy taken care of and the skin tone is exact, but there's many good uses.
Yeah.
If I can dovetail off that just for one
ahead.
second.
Do it.
See, I get to curveball.
Yeah, you can do it to
So
me.
just on the point about dopamine,
Yeah.
we have evolved to see objects, right? You only have a fraction of neural pathways that are triggered when you look at a 2D thing versus the actual real thing, because your eyes are always literally scanning. You can't control it and stop it, and there's lots of images we can show to prove this. So you do have better memory, you have better cognition, and better understanding of the world when you have an object or the hologram of the object versus any other medium. So we like to pitch that. Now that may or may not be something that's useful for the application.
Right.
But if you want to have better cognition, holograms are an answer.
Which is, I think that I was talking about this at like the dinner last night of this idea.
Who doesn't
again
talk
with
about
it.
this idea?
I know. Well, me, I talk about it all the time, so it's like whether I'm here or not here. But the idea that when people were talking about virtual reality, that they say it's like I was there. They're using it as if you were actually physically there. And with avatars and virtual beings, you're talking to a person, and this is that you're actually seeing the object. It feels like
Yes.
that you're seeing and interacting with an object, even though it's not an object, it is light.
Correct, but it is equivalent.
To it.
Right,
Yeah.
to
It is
your brain.
mathematically equivalent. It's not an illusion. It's actually the thing.
Right. So, Natascha, you were.
I was
go
thinking, I
ahead.
think what would be very helpful to where I always find this and kind of touches off what you were saying is every time anyone approaches me with like, oh, I have this idea, because like I get a lot of, oh my God, I have this idea, I want to create a hologram of X. And I think the first thing you talk about is what is the goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Like you were saying, whether you're looking at through marketing perspective, you're trying to connect with someone like can't be there. So understanding that goal, and then a lot of times too is like, well, who's your audience? Because we've did a lot of projects. I want a hologram, I want VR, and then it becomes a failure because they didn't think about like who's using that, who's going to understand, who's going to be interacting with that. And those are huge things to do before you spend money on these, because then you'll think it's a failure when it could have not been, because maybe AR was the better way to go or VR was the better one. VR, like no joke, I would get calls all the time like, Natascha, I need a hologram on Monday. I'm like, okay, it's Friday. Like, what do we need? Like, we called the hologram bat line, where we had like an emergency hologram. We need it by Monday. And I was like, well, Bob can't be here, so we have to like put him here or this place. I was like, and that literally has happened, right? And so then I'd be like, okay, well, is there anybody else going to be there? And like, we're going to be videoing it. I'm like, well, we probably don't need to spend all the money on the hologram. We could just do this in other ways. So I think that's one of the key things that you take anyway today is like knowing your goal, why you use that, or knowing your client's goal, and then understanding the audience on the back end to really make it sense on what medium to use.
And so the company that you're at now does a lot of sports content. And why do you think that that is kind of a great, like almost broad case study, because there's so many different kind of sports?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, so a lot of times we have developers build things that might have never been to a sporting event, right? And when you go to a sporting event, they might not have realized, like when you throw something, you know, your trajectory is going to be very different. A little kid does it versus a person. So sporting events are really interesting because the fan, like you have a very focused fan. You know, they're the most they're go team, but they also want to be a part of it. They want to be a part of that. And they're also very short attention span as well, right? So what we've noticed is we want to make sure that all those experiences are personalized to the speaker, and also they have selection. So we have many players that they can select from, or many experiences that they can select from. And we always say, so ours are like 1-minute experiences. So what we do is a lot of times is you can sign up before you get to the display through a text or a QR code. So as soon as you get there, the output is boom, 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 boom. So I think all those things on the forefront. I think another thing we did is a lot of the brand sponsorship. So one example I had was we worked with a very well-known auto company, and they had we were doing all the stuff at sporting events where you could actually build the car. It was really exciting to see the hologram of the car because they couldn't bring the car into the stadium. So we took that image and you could build it, pick the color, customize it, and have it sent to yourself. And then on the back end, the auto company would get, oh, Bob from San Diego really was into this blue, type of car, blah, blah, blah. So the data was awesome. But then they're like, oh, we want to take this to life size. We have this huge event next week. But they didn't tell us that it wasn't going to be at a sporting event. Well, it was individuals that were 70 plus, it was donors, and none of them could do the hand gestures because no one tested it. And it was just like new to them. Like kids get it. And it was more of an education piece, and the brand ambassador. So it was the biggest. It was horrible. It was like one of those things where because also you don't want the user to feel like they're doing something wrong, right? So on both ends, you have to make sure the experience is positive. And it was just, again, the audience was the biggest part there. But I think those things are so important in that space because the consumer can be very fickle. And as soon as they don't, the thing that kills me most is like, oh, it doesn't work, it's broken. And that's one user that thinks that won't work again. So I think that's where we have to be careful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am 5'3" and sort of short, and what's very funny is walking around new technologies, and they are assuming that I am the size and the height of the developer. And so when there was the early 316 VR, I would feel like I was floating because they'd put the camera a little too high, and it's still that kind of experience happened again.
Or they throw
yesterday,
kid content at you?
that it's just that they're just assuming I'm taller. Even this, it's not made for a short person. But I understand that. But I think that understanding who your audience is, not just height, age, understanding what their needs are might be, even I think that kind of thing gets lost a lot because I always say, I go back to, I told you all this, my so what, who cares, which is the who cares is who's your target audience, and the so what is you're making it, but what's the value proposition? So what? Well, it goes 100 times faster. So what? And if you have the answer to the so what, then you know. What were you about to say?
One of the biggest thing I should have brought up when you're thinking of sports stadiums is light. So you're protecting light, right? Concourses are outdoors. So one of the hardest things when you're working with a lot of these venues is, oh, we can just put it right here, right at the center of the concert. No, because light's coming through it, and then you can't see anything, right? So that actually, when you're thinking about what it is, you can't. That was probably the hardest thing of location, right? So a lot of times, I'm sure you saw a hologram rolled out of the Super Bowl, and not the easiest task sometimes, of like, because you can't see it from every angle. So I think those are things you have to think about of what's available now. But the light piece is like, people forget that it actually is a projection of light. So
Absolutely, that's where people who've worked on air within sports stadiums say you have to user test with everybody in the stadium because it will fail if you don't have that many people, at least now until we get like 5G, 6G, then it'll be a different story. But what are some of the things that you have to look out for or could go wrong or whatever it is that it would be just much easier for people in this audience to know as opposed to like going in sort of saying, I want a hologram. It's like, what are the things you have to think of? You said light. Are there other kinds of things?
Well, I was talking about, in the healthcare, holographic medicine, so privacy, obviously, HIPAA compliance, skin color. I mean, if you're diagnosing a rash, it has to be the true color that you're seeing in the hologram. If you're looking at someone whose pupils are dilated because they hit their head, you have to really have that type of clarity from it. But when you were mentioning value proposition, I wanted to touch on
brand strategy. I go back to that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, just that I think one of the exciting areas, and some of the people I work with are involved with, is the generative AI. And when you infuse the hologram with that, I mean, the possibilities are limitless. What you can do and the different categories that you can be part of, from the entertainment industry to digital advertising and retail and training. It just is really exciting, but what you do have to look out for is, what if it does say something you don't want it to say? So now you have to think about not just your hologram, but also walled off data that you want it to say.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because a lot of the technology, I feel like emerging technologies, they'll ultimately say, and AI is falling for this now, of this technology will solve everything for everyone in every industry under any circumstance. What are the industries? And I know I'm pushing on this, but what are the industries? We said sports, there's some reason, there's a little bit of healthcare. Are there other industries that you're wishing for, John?
Are you asking about AI now, or are you talking
I'm
about
asking about holograms. We're sticking to holograms. I just know that AI right now is falling for that, and I don't want everybody in the audience to assume holograms right for everything.
That question really is
it's a tough one, I know.
It's a product market fit question, right?
Absolutely.
Because part of this is a question of, is there the budget that's sufficient given where technologies are, given commercial grade power, for example. If you're doing even LED video walls, you need to have commercial grade power, you need to have media servers, you need to have different ways to distribute the media. You're not going to be doing necessarily things that are distributed in wide format, more bespoke. So those are the types of customers that are the perfect customers that approach us saying, we're trying to do something that we cannot accomplish with other technologies.
Yep.
To your question, I think this is related to the question that you just brought up about the things to consider. Proximity to the hologram. You have an exponential increase in the density of the wavefront that's required. So when our customers say, well, I want to be able to see it from a mile away, and I want it to be perfectly pristine and clear if I have it right up to here, you go, okay, with dynamite and time, we can do anything. Mm-hmm. However, you are now at a budget that totally explodes. So that's when they come back and go, I don't really need that. It's cool if it's, here instead of here. So it's a question of the product features and making sure that you're not over-specifying or over-engineering.
And the other thing that even as I'm learning more and more about holograms is the interactivity and the way to sort of communicate back and forth. Can you just talk about that for a second? Because I feel like I think the vision of a hologram to me is almost like a static or slightly moving, and it's not that.
Correct, well, at least with solid light.
Okay.
Right, and you may be also referring to the laser holograms, the original. I'll call them they're beautiful. They're a benchmark where they're encoding interference. It's a little bit about what you're wearing.
Yeah.
The ability to create that kind of bandwidth in real time is really hard.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why we offer our customers something we call the wave tracer, which is an engine that allows you to do that much computation in real time. We can connect it to an AI and have you talk to the hologram, and it will interact, again, with all the known limitations of AI.
Yeah,
right?
right.
Or you could have motion capture. You can then stream motion capture anywhere between point to point. You could do it, technically speaking, from anywhere in the world, as long as you can do the real-time computation, which is something that we provide as part of the tech.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is when people were, how many people in the audience know about volumetric capture? Like generally, I would say almost everybody, right? And so sometimes when people talk about volumetric capture, they might interchange the word with hologram. They might say, well, we're creating a hologram. And I think that that kind of confusion is leading a lot of people to not realize that a holographic display or a light field display is different, that it's almost like video and a television. Like, go ahead.
Yeah, and speaking to that, volumetric capture is traditionally still a 2D representation of a volume. Whereas things like the light stage, if anyone has used light stages and used it on all the big blockbuster films, is encoding the reflectance of the object, which is massive bandwidth. But that is where, if you think of the difference of, if you look at a 3D model in a package like Maya, and you're just looking at it in the UI, not with a renderer.
Right. That's
the volume capture is just the shading that is more of a simple shading versus actual reflectance, the diffraction, the refraction, all the things that make the ray trace versus non-ray trace. It's kind of a way to think of it.
If you're creating something, you can create the object using volumetric capture, but then you have to display it in a way that's not on a flat screen.
Correct.
You need to display it either like on one of your products, or experience it in VR, or walk around it in AR, or whatever you might be.
Yep.
I just wanted to add that the definition of hologram and how it's used in the world and in movies is expanding greatly, and it's being driven somewhat not even by the scientific definition, but by just how people identify with that word, whether they're playing a game that has a holographic avatar, or they're using it in an enterprise. It's becoming, and I wonder if any of my panelists disagree, it's becoming much more a bigger, wider definition.
No, I think for sure. And I think one question that I don't want to not answer was about the industries. I think, and we're in a room that says AI, so that's why I wanted to bring this up, is a few years back we built a holographic bank teller. And it was really interesting because this organization first wanted to mimic over one of the founders' wives, and when we did that, we can have a whole other conversation on the uncanny valley where it was too realistic, where no one wanted to actually interact with it. And we used a bot that had canned responses because it was a financial institution, so we ended up building it was basically a face made of code, right? And you could ask questions in terms of like very basic, and actually we got it to where you could actually pull out money. It was kind of never went to market because COVID hit, but you also have to think about, that was a great use case, but also if you're thinking about the individual who's going into a bank right now, is probably not a young consumer, right? Because it's all cashless world, and that ended up being another barrier to building that was, it was just too much, right? We were like too soon, but it was it worked. It was really cool because it worked, and it was this concept, but it went to that emotional where like, wait, I'm telling this person my financial information, right? So you have to think about that piece of it. And before they were using the robots, I don't know if you remember Pepper, that would be all around, but it was this interesting thing of like, can you trust what I'm speaking to? They're retaining my information, also what is happening. So it was really interesting to see the reaction and the emotional piece of it, and that industry, like it definitely can work for things, but I think we have a way to go to trust that. And
right. So I want to follow up, because on that question around sort of key performance indicators, like the KPIs of what Natascha, like where, when you're dealing with different customers or potential customers, like what kinds of what are they looking for? What are you offering? Like, what should people be looking into?
Yeah, so sports world, marketing agency, it's a lot of it's dwell time. So how long using this experience is someone standing there longer than they would have been? Like we had amazing dwell time with this experience with the Titans where people were standing for like 6 minutes where before they were just like walking past, right? Because it was, and they're capturing that attention and then they can follow up with that. And then because a lot of these experiences are shareable, the metrics turn into how many people shared it, the impressions on the social front. But in the true like days with Ventana, I would always ask the client, I'm like, well, there's a lot of first evers left in the hologram space. And I think that was, so if you want to go after like a PR headline, a lot of times people would come to us and say, we want to be the first ever X. We want to be the first. So like we did the first ever holographic karaoke with Rob Thomas. Rob Thomas, if you don't know who he is, like he hadn't been, he got more media. It was incredible. Like I was impressed, like a PR background, like the amount of media we got Rob Thomas on his like comeback tour because you could sing hologram, and he loved it. He was like, that's the thing about holograms, like he had so much fun with it. We were filming, he's like, this is amazing. And he was like, and people would just like dance with him and you get a video, and it was like that energy of creating it, and that was to them, for them the measurement was the PR, it was incredible, like, but they did it right. They knew their audience, right? They knew the story, they captured it correctly. And so I think back to that is like, for us, it's either like that dwell time in the sports space, and then for the headline piece, just because a lot of the use cases for me is advertising and marketing, so it ties into those metrics with impressions.
Right. So what is coming next? And I know that there's probably a certain thing, everybody is NDA'd, but what should people start looking to say, gosh, that's really interesting, or gosh, that I should start, if there are people looking to create or develop things that they need to be on the lookout for?
I'll jump in and say next year when this panel happens, we're going to actually have a hologram on it.
Yeah. Somebody said I should be doing, all of you should be different variations of holograms.
It's going to start blending. The worlds are going to be that
Just
mixed
a hologram
reality.
now. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, we actually may be holograms.
Well, that's true. I wouldn't dispute that either. We might actually be a simulation. Okay.
Well, with your display, it would interact.
That's right.
So you just might not have the haptics.
But I want
That's
to dovetail on what Natascha was saying, because I think analytics are going to become essential, and measuring audience sentiment. There's a whole, it turns out your face has a whole language of expression, so people will not only have holograms in a whole wide variety of industries, but they'll have so much rich data to make them better at their businesses. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, but then you also are worried about the safety and security. So this is where you end up having how much data, how much safety, where do you balance?
I will add one more thing, that the governance policies, and then I worked on a bit of it. I think it's going to be tokenized. It's going to be decentralized, and all, your book, Metaverse, and Dan Mapes, for those of us who know Dan, the spatial web, all the ideas that you hear in that, this networked of all things.
Yeah, I was the one with Luis. He and I were debating about the decentralized and not decentralized and all that sort of stuff. But that's for another panel.
Yeah.
So advancements, come on.
In terms of what
what's
to be on the
coming?
lookout
What's coming? Yeah. And I know you can't announce anything, but
plug. Go to holowire.com or go to our website. And towards the end of this year, look for something out of this world.
Oh my goodness! Can't wait. Again, okay.
Shameless plug.
Yes. No. Exactly. Any other shameless plugs or no?
No, I think what you're thinking about what's coming next. I think where we came from, like hardware is advanced, software is advanced. Like what you're building, as I said, like 2015 wasn't that only 9 years ago, because it was a long time ago. But still, like the advancement in that technology, and I always think, in our eyes, we're probably very critical. In your guys' eyes, you see it. But I'll never forget, we did this project with Nike at Frisco, and like the high school team got to see their first uniforms sponsored by Nike come out of the ground floor as a hologram at the Frisco Training Center. Like these are like high school kids. And we captured it on video, and all I see is like, oh, it looks a little glare. And this guy goes, stop. Because the kids are like, and the kids, like, these kids were like, I wish I could just use video over, so excited. Like, to them, this is just like, wow, right? I think those moments, that emotional connection, And I think that's coming back. These brands are taking risks again. These organizations are investing again. I think that's what I'm excited about is finding that ambassador in that agency or brand or organization who's willing to be like, let's build something cool together. And I'm seeing that come back. It went a little, and I think that and everything that's being built, like what you guys are both building, is the excitement for me, because I think, where we're all going to be holograms talking. I personally like people and like to talk, which is kind of funny. Like, I'd like to be in places, so I would rather be here in person than as a hologram at the moment. But that might be a long way. But I think it's like utilizing the technology and seeing what's out there right now is exciting to me, because I'm just seeing the energy back in the space and kind of.
Right. It reminds me a little bit of when people were like, it's really hard to sell VR, right? It's like it's really hard to show exactly how cool a hologram is on a 2D video. It's like you have to be there to experience it. But I think that might be one of the new advancements.
Interrelated to that is if you think about 2K versus 4K versus 8K, what the display industry is going through, and how do you show the value proposition of 8K versus 4K if your eye is resolution limited? It's hard, even if it's higher density.
I think holograms too will make us a more sustainable world, because our digital twin holograms are going to beam places, and we won't have to use fossil fuels. We can be everywhere anytime.
And what's coming
Molly,
next
you're going really far.
Yeah.
We have a lot of debates for later.
What's coming next? Like being able to I was watching a bunch of videos this morning, it was just incredible. Like we've come that far, and like it's getting there, right? Just seeing what you guys are building is pretty awesome. So.
Right. So
just,
and I'm sorry to do this to put you on, like, how big is the image of the display that you have now? Like, how big can you get?
How big is the object that you're? Okay. So if you take a look, another shameless plug, go to our website. Funny story. Before COVID, I was on my soapbox and I said, we will never show a 2D video of a hologram.
Yeah, you can't get away with that.
Well, then COVID hit and went, well, shit, okay. So now you can see a 2D video of a hologram. It does not do it justice because it's two-dimensional, of course, but we move the camera around so you can see it, and you can see other people interacting and poking and moving things around. In those experiences, we're showing, think of about an 8-inch holographic sphere, so anything that is within that 8-inch volume is with a well over 100-degree field, fully holographic, fully real.
Right.
Now that could be altered, and a lot of this is either in-field customization or something in the phase guide optics, where if I don't need as wide of a field of view, I can have a larger object with a more limited field of view. So that's the photon.
Right. It's like the content versus distribution, the quality versus.
It's just trades,
all that.
but it's photon trades, which is kind of a fun new concept when you talk about new things to start thinking about. But that is based on single panels. And just like a traditional video wall, you have a cabinet or a panel, and then you can put multiples together. You can, technically speaking, put an infinite number of these together, so your objects can get infinitely large. Again, all theory, depending,
The like infinite
theory,
is what.
Yeah, the practicality is you're going to start seeing things that are much larger size.
And that's what I can't. I think a lot of the video that's out there that is simulating like a three-dimensional object is almost like hinting to where people want it to go, like bigger and bigger. So where can people see the different, the like your, Vanessa, like your company and the stuff that you're working on, where can they see it?
Sporting Fields, I can say, so it, right now I'm just trying to think of all the, if you go to my LinkedIn, I post them all, but,
well, that's
we have stuff at Columbus Blue Jackets where you could do pose with the pros with some of the players, Ottawa Senators, I'm just trying to think in Colorado. We have stuff at the Boston Red Sox, so I'm just different stadiums right now, just in it's based on the season. So a lot of also, Pro Football Hall of Fame has one of still the individual Ventana holograms, which is pretty cool. It's coaches, and it's a whole locker room experience, so it's pretty immersive. If you ever visit Graceland, the Memphis, we have a lot of interactive experiences there where you can actually put on a holographic jumpsuit. So there's a couple, there's just a few off the list.
And any other, you said your video, and then?
Yes, go to our website, shameless plug. Things that will be out in the wild I can't speak to, because
So
that's customer
follow
stuff. But
you-
follow the blog, holowire.com. Shameless plug.
Okay.
Looking at Jeff, our
It's not
marketing.
shameless. You have to plug because people need
You
to
have
be
to
able
go
to
see
see
it
it. And then
if you want to see it.
exactly, that's what
Trademark,
somebody needs
patent
to
pending.
start. Right. Exactly.
You say it 3
And what about you?
Yeah, 3 times. Right?
Follow Molly Lavik's LinkedIn. When I can share something, I will, with the people I work with.
Amazing.
And also, if you want to know if you ever have a question like, I want to build a hologram, just reach out. That's what I love it. Like, ideas came that way, and so I always think the best projects came from the craziest idea. And I always like to say yes, but maybe do it this way. So LinkedIn is the best way, but there's no bad question in holograms.
Any questions from the audience?
Wow.
Oh my
That is
goodness,
energetic.
that
was inspirational there
was.
at this hour.
Thank you for hosting this panel. Thank you for Sam for moderating it. My name is Farsim Shadab. I'm the founder of Holo.space, HoloSpace, and my teams, which are global at this point, are effectively working groups trying to solve some of these deeper riddles, which you guys beautifully addressed. There's deeper philosophical considerations around real definitions, almost the ontology of holography, without getting overly complicated about
And
it right now.
you're hiding Charlie's face from me, so I need to see Charlie's face too.
You need a hologram to solve that problem. Anyhow, so I really appreciate the very technical addressing of the cultural, the marketing and commercial challenges, and also the deep technical, universe and science around this. What we talk about a lot is holomimicry, because you referenced, Molly, biomimicry, which is really key to this. And the argument being that at some point, the physics meets the commercial industrial electronic science, and there's a holomimetic, if you will, moment, where it's like the physics needs to properly reference what's going on, and bringing Marshall McLuhan full circle, right, to the medium being the message. And so there's this question of, are the artifacts that we're creating, because if the map is not the territory, and the maps that we kind of take for granted now in this Cartesian universe of 2D, everything, and even Apple Vision Pro giving us a 3D experience of 2D screens, which seems so ass backwards to me. It's kind of ridiculous, but I get that there's a product market fit for that right now. I'm going to address the question to John. Is there a point you see coming where, and forgive me if this doesn't allow you guys to centralize all the power into your own entity, a chat GPT breakthrough moment where even Google, who developed GPT technology in-house, had to accept that the transformer model is globally a phenomenon that anyone academically could, if they understand it, can go start their own company and compete against Google, right? So is there a holography moment for us to consider that's akin to that could be around the corner, where effectively a giant decentralized revolution of insight into this, moving us beyond sort of the limits of in transmedia, what we're kind of seeing here at AWE right now?
So is there going to be a point of which this goes mass?
Well, let me compare it to the ChatGPT example. With software, you can have very different inflection points. You can have very different moments. When you're dealing with hardware, you have silicon, you have fabrication. So the user base, the install base, the hardware base has to be out there. If you look at the iPhone, for example, you had to have a sufficient number of those devices before the App Store was able to have a global market share, a hold on everybody, all the music, all the apps, all the GPS, and that was disruptive massively for almost every business. So once you have things that are in mass production, that's where you start to see these inflection points. Mass production is not in the next several years, but it will be happening much faster than anyone would imagine.
Right. I always say the 3 to 5 years. Everybody says 3 to 5 years until it actually happens. So every year it's 3 to 5 years.
And if I say 10 years, that means I have no idea.
Yes, exactly.
Don't tell the investor. Right?
So if anybody wants to reach out, obviously they can talk to you while you're here. Any other ways? You said LinkedIn is the best for you. Molly,
Yeah,
was it
LinkedIn.
your website, LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, website, email me, email Jeff. He's here. He can hide.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for
that's good.
listening. And
Thank you. We have 2 quick announcements before you duck out the door. First of all, we need to give a huge Thank you to our diamond sponsor here at AWE, Qualcomm, our titanium sponsors, Meta, Niantic, Snap AR, and Sightful, and of course the gold sponsors, AWS, HoloLight, Infinite Rabbit Holes, Lenovo, Magic Leap, Microsoft Mesh, Nipa, Pico, XReal, Zappar, and all of the sponsors and exhibitors. As you know, tomorrow is our last day of AWE, lots of awesome sessions, but the schedule is shorter tomorrow, so if you haven't yet checked out the schedule, the expo is in its final day, opening at 10 a.m., closing at 3, and at 3:45 in the Grand Ballroom will be the Best in Show Awards. So thank you all. Thanks again to our panel. I'm sure they have lots more to talk about, so reach out to them on LinkedIn, and have a great evening.